All right. Hey, we're ready to go here in beautiful Des Moines, Iowa. How are you in California?
I'm doing well. How's everybody else doing?
Good.
Yay.
Hey, Mark, can you pass back the host over to me?
Yeah, just
Should
give me
be
some
able to
instructions.
right-click on my name and make me the host.
Okay, and your name is Ryan?
Yeah, Ryan.
Right-click, make host, like that?
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, so Andrew, are we ready to get going?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay, so my name is Ryan Green. I'm the marketing manager for CIC. We're a tenant screening and background check company. Been in business for 30 years as of this February. And what I do is I work with our company as well as the industry and many other associations, doing information, education, promoting tenant screening, what's happening in legislation, through print, through digital. So kind of all over the place with working in this industry. And I've been in this industry for about 10 years now. So for the call this morning, we are going to be recording the presentation, and the association is going to have the video available for everybody after we conclude. To start with, I am going to mute everybody so that we can avoid some feedback on the line. Should just have cleared up when I took care of that. There is a chat option that if you do have any questions or anything that pops up, you can write into there and then we can address it later. I will open up for a Q&A at the very end, and we can do either some verbal questions or we can do chat if that's easier depending on where you're located. So what I want to do this morning is I'm going to cover a complete background check that's comprised of 3 different CIC reports. We have a complete TransUnion credit report, a CIC nationwide criminal search, and a CIC nationwide eviction history. This report is going to be on a sample applicant that's going to have a lot of red flags so that we can demonstrate a high-risk tenant. Before diving into the report, I do want to talk a little bit about red flags. So what we're talking about is red flags for file variations or warnings and alerts from the Consumer Credit Bureau. So for example, a Social Security card has never been issued. What we want to cover and what we want to look at is making sure that you have established and follow a written procedure that spells out what actions will be taken to check an applicant's identity and to verify that identity if you come across any of these red flags. So if any red flag does appear on a credit report, you should contact the applicant for further clarification and have further supporting documentation presented. If you cannot work out the discrepancy with the applicant and you still have reason to suspect identity theft, the ruling says that you are not to rent to the applicant in question, nor should you furnish the applicant with a copy of the Consumer Credit Report. You are under no obligation under the ruling to report the fraud. You would need to furnish the applicant with an adverse action letter, though. From there, you can dispute any discrepancies directly with the credit bureau. Some of the top red flags that I just want to list: having no rental history, having gaps in the rental history, an incomplete or illegible application, information that doesn't match from one document to the next, torn, faded, or altered documentation, negative information from prior landlords, eviction filings or judgments. That's a very big one that we'll go in depth on later. Unverifiable addresses, and if there's a landlord or prior reference that are members of the applicant's family. That's not always as big of a red flag, but something to take note of if you come across it. So moving on, we'll jump straight into this credit report now. So what we have on screen here, we have a CIC provided credit report from TransUnion. So on the very top of every report, we're going to list the credit bureau that it comes from. In this case, it's going to be TransUnion. The report number is internal for us, So anybody who receives a report and needs to reference the applicant, that's about the best way that you're going to ensure accuracy very quickly. And then information that just when it was requested, if you typed in a rental amount, it will show up, and if you typed in a special reference, it will. What information that you put in is going to appear at the very top. So even though it's information reported by the applicant, it's the information the applicant gave you that you then typed in. Verbatim will show up here. Their name, their address, a social security number, which we'll talk a little bit how that affects various aspects of the report. There's a very big issue going on in our country right now that you've probably seen with personal identifiable information and protecting consumers. So we do mask the last 4 numbers of socials, and certain aspects of the report don't even include the social anymore, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then the date of birth of the applicant. The social check is an aspect of the report that is verifying the accuracy of just the social security number provided. One big part about this check is ensuring the information that you type in is correct, it is accurate the way that it was presented. It is going to look at that number and it is going to reference it specifically. So if anything is mistyped, it's going to give inaccurate results because of that. Some of the red flags that I mentioned are shown here. The input social security number is reported as deceased. The input last name is not associated with that social. The input social is associated with a different name and address and unable to verify the address. It shows you what was reported, although that's going to be masked at this location, where it was, the potential date range of when it was reported. Generally for social security numbers, especially in the last 50 or 60 years, they're going to be within about a year range. It shouldn't be a tremendous gap there. And then the date of birth that would have been reported associated with it. Also, we'll provide some different names that could have been associated with the report. And when you see alias names, really an alias name can come from anything that may have been reported at one time or another. For credit purposes, if you sign up for a utility account and you threw in a middle initial that you didn't throw onto a loan that you opened, that's going to record as an alias. It's just a different variation of the name. So these aren't always red flags. This one right here that shows Jonathan Q. Clampett, 4th one down, that's a bit odd. It's a big discrepancy, so that's something to note. All the other ones are just minor variations on the person's name. And then it also includes any addresses that might have been associated with that social in the past. Also good to look at if they don't correspond in any way to the applicant provided information. That can also be considered a red flag for you to review. So here we get into what the Bureau reports. So they take the information that you've already put in, and then they provide what they have on file that matches and what might be varied. So in this case, they have this consumer listed as John Consumer as opposed to Jonathan. They have multiple addresses listed. They have the date of birth available, when it was reported, and employer information, as well as when that information was reported to the Bureau. These are good, basic, identifiable traits to be able to look at and ensure the accuracy of the applicant that you're reviewing for tenancy. The file identification and fraud search, just looking to see whether or not they see anything on this file that has been triggered as a red flag. If there has been anything such as a consumer who has put an alert on their account because they've had issues with fraud in the past, this may return results where you would have to call the Bureau, or they would have to call the Bureau and release this information specifically to you so that their credit can't be run without their authentication first. So moving on the report, we take a detour from the credit portion and we start getting into the background information. The first up is eviction search results. The first that I'd like to talk about with this is when you look at an eviction report, we provide a primary repository and a secondary repository. Both of these are critical to getting the full picture of an applicant's eviction history. The biggest difference between the two of them is the primary is very heavily focused and has data that has been accumulated over about 2 decades, heavily on the West Coast. The secondary is more of a national database that's been records accumulated over all 50 states and Washington, D.C. So the two combined give a very comprehensive eviction report. The database actually pulls from more than 36 million unique records, no duplicates, and provides up-to-date accuracy with daily records added. The way these read are going to be very similar to what you would see with any sort of criminal reports. They are all court cases, so they're going to list who the defendant is, which you're looking for your applicant's name here. If that's different, then that's a red flag to notice. The address from where they are living, when it was filed, a case number for reference. If we need to do additional research, this is what we're going to look up. Which court, if there was a judgment, what that amount was. The type of notice, which the type of notice can vary with different codes. It can be something that refers to pay or vacate, whether or not it was an unlawful detainer in which the police were actually coming to the property and having to remove the person and evict them, whether it was a pay or quit charge. So whatever the notice type is going to reference what got them in this situation in the first place and how it was handled. Who the plaintiff is, generally you would appear on this if you were having to file an eviction. The disposition, what happened in the case, who the plaintiff's attorney was, and how to get in touch with them. When you get to the secondary, the national, it's all going to look very similar type of information. As you can see, it does have social security number, however, it's not applicable. In court cases, courts around the United States, it's very rare to ever come across a social security number that will be included with a court filing. They don't want to put consumers at risk and have sensitive information available, so they generally try to rely on primarily the name and date of birth. And in some counties, you have to be cautious because they're not even doing the date of birth to limit that data even more, which obviously makes it very difficult to try and get accuracy whenever we're looking at applicants. So we're limited then to the name and the address, but additional research can always be done. So we always encourage, especially with court cases of any kind, before jumping to a conclusion, double check, give us a call, give our researchers a call. They'll do some additional looking into it and verifying the accuracy. The next section that we get into is the nationwide criminal. As you can see, we have in the header here, there's a lot of information that we incorporate into this. It is comprehensive, it is nationwide, and the reason that we have so many different parts of it listed is because there is no such thing as a national federal database of all crimes. As much as we would love there to be something that we can log into and see every criminal activity that's happened in the United States, they simply have not gotten that far yet. So what we're forced to do is pull from a variety of jurisdictions and databases and registries and combine that into a clean and easy to read report for each applicant. So in this case, the nationwide criminal scan is going to cover the local courts from all 50 states plus Washington, D.C. It includes records from jails and prisons, as well as researching for any wants or warrants that could be active on an applicant. It also is going to have access to the sex offender registry for each state and anything nationally that may show up, which is going to be reported a little bit differently, as you'll see further down in the report. OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. And this database is a federal one that looks at drug trafficking and terrorism. These are high priority people that hopefully you will never see a hit on OFAC, but if you do, please be aware it is a very serious one to take notice of. And then Interpol, which is international, anything that may show up from outside of the United States. The way that the report reads whenever there is a hit on an applicant is similar to what we looked at with eviction, however, more identifiable information. So whenever it is available, it's not just going to give you their name and their date of birth. As I mentioned, social security numbers are not included, so name and date of birth are the primary ways that we reference an applicant. We do also reference the alias names that I mentioned earlier. So just in case they were arrested and they provided a different name that went through the system, but then came out as them, we're still going to look at that as well. The category is going to be criminal for any of these. The source of the jurisdiction is going to be same as evictions, wherever it was. Then we start getting into identifiable traits, and this is extremely important for accuracy, especially in the cases where you've been able to actually meet with an applicant, show them the property, get a copy of their license or any other form of identification. You want to cross-reference this to make sure if they have a criminal hit that if this case it says it is a black male who is 240 pounds and about 6 feet tall, and if your applicant is clearly not fitting that description, need to contact as soon as possible before making a decision so that we can verify accuracy and figure out what may have happened. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen when we're looking at minimal information such as just name and date of birth to try and reference these databases. Some additional information it provides, if there's any scar or marks that were included, the case number as well to reference it, the state and the county that we mentioned earlier. Here's where it talks about what the offense was. It goes in pretty good detail to let you know whether or not was this a violent crime, was this a sex offense, assault, was it a misdemeanor or something petty, things that may not necessarily be applicable to your rental policy. All aspects that we really want to look at and make sure whether or not this person is qualified for renting and someone you can trust. In this case, robbery with a gun, a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit. It's a pretty serious crime. A felony of that level, a violent felony, is generally good grounds to be able to make a denial. We get into a little bit more that was all part of this case. Another offense, second-degree murder, dangerous act. The offense date when it happened, the commitment date, and then when their release date was or is scheduled for. Whether it's evictions or whether it's criminal, the standard rule is the statute of limitations on reporting is 7 years. For evictions, it changes a little bit. For example, Oregon has changed their law so they can only go back 5 years as opposed to 7. But the majority of the country is 7 years. However, it's still going to report based on when they were released, and it's going to vary depending on the severity of the crime. For example, when we get down here, a picture shows up. This is the sex offense registry. Sex offenses don't necessarily adhere to the 7-year rule. They hang out in the registry much longer and they report much longer. And they're also the only ones that will come through, if it's available, and display an actual photo of the applicant, which is about the best way you're going to get to be able to verify accuracy. As you can see, the category shows up as part of the sex offender registry. It still provides all of the various traits that are available, previous address to verify, and then also lists what the offense was, how severe of a crime they committed, so that you can see whether or not was this a level 1 or a level 3 sex offender, and whether or not they would meet your criteria still. I wanted to show on the report the alias section. We generally mask this. It's not included because when we're talking about alias names, here we have 2 good examples of how they could just change slightly, but we can come back with 18 or 20 pages worth of aliases sometimes with the amount of information, and a letter that's different in the name could come up as an alias. So all of it's used on every report as a good cross-reference tool, but you would just need to call us if it was something that you actually wanted to see on every report. Otherwise, we just hide it so that you don't have to print out that many pages. A check scan we offer is very basic, just going to say whether or not approval is recommended or approval is denied based on whether or not they have written bad checks. And if it is denied, it will give a little bit more information about how long ago it may have happened and what the crime was. So after the check scan, now we come back full circle, and the rest of the report is focused on credit. We start off with a 24-month history chart, just showing the amount of trade lines accounts that they have open, going back for 24 full months. And then we give a summary of it before we give all the details. So anytime you see trade lines, it's just referencing every account that's been reported. Positive trade lines, everything that's paid as agreed. Negative trade lines, anything that may have been missed payments or gone further towards collections. Since it does go back 24 months, it lists how many accounts are currently active. If they have closed a credit card in the last 24 months, we'll still report on it. It just may not be as big of a factor since it's not a current account. Obviously, negative trade lines corresponds generally with number of late payments. It's negative how many times they've missed. Their total estimated monthly debts is going to show up based on what the credit reports from open accounts, credit card debt, auto loan payments, any obligations. And then if you actually enter in the rent, it will incorporate that as well. How much on these missed payments is total past due, and what their percentage of available credit is still. When we're looking at the information below, we have a separate section that talks about collections. And so we do give a brief summary of if they have any collection accounts, how many are reported, and what is the current balance of those accounts. On the complete credit history, we have it broken down into columns and rows. So when we start off, we have who the creditor is. In this instance, it would be the name of the credit card company or the financial institution that they have a loan through, and then what the account number or information is to be able to reference that person. Next, we have the date that it was reported, the date the account was first opened. The account status is going to give a letter-number code, and I'll get into what those refer to. We have a chart included on every report that breaks that down, so as a quick reference. Many of them are going to show as the same, but we can always take a look in a minute and see what those reference. So in this one, I-1 is going to be an installment account that's paid on time. So I'll go into those a little bit later. The high credit is going to show what the highest balance was, what the credit limit is. The approximate balance is how much they currently still owe. The terms, how much they're obligated to pay each month, which is what gets calculated into that total estimated monthly debts that I referenced up here. How many months this account has been revolving. If the account has been past due, how many times has it been 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days past due? This E right here is referencing ECOA, which is for whether or not it's a joint account. It's the type of account, either joint, individual, or if there's an authorized user on the account. If there is an amount that's past due, that number shows up over here. And then the DLA stands for the date of last activity on the account. Accounts that were closed 12 months ago are going to have an older date, and current accounts should just be showing whatever the most recent month that was reported is. So when I come down here, the account type, status codes, and description is what I was referring to when I referenced that I-1. For the letter, a revolving account, a credit card, anything that they're paying off monthly that fluctuates, any open account, days that 30, 60, or 90 days. If it's an installment account, like an auto loan, or in this case, you wouldn't necessarily see a mortgage as often for renters, but they had that, a mortgage account would show up. And then the number references what the activity has been. So if it's a 0, it's a brand new account. They really just haven't had any activity with it. A 1 is what you're hoping to see on every one of these. So whether it's revolving, installment, open, you always want to see -1. So that means that they're paying as agreed. The lower the number, the worse it becomes. A 2 is 30 days, all the way down to a 7, which is they haven't paid that bill in 180 days. And by the time you see an 8, there's been a repossession, and anything with a 9 means it's been charged off to bad debt, which means that account is going to be in this next section, accounts placed for collections. So I want to reference, it looks pretty similar to the trade lines. Just run through real quick on what these mean at the top. The creditor is the same, just listing who it is as well as an account number. The status is always going to show as a collection account in this area. The open date, when it was sent to collections, what the current status is, and the report date, if there's data lapse activity, if there's a current balance remaining, what the date was that balance came through, what was the original amount that they owe, whether the account was closed. MOP stands for the manner of payment, and as you can also see, I-9 here, installment accounts, 9 referring to sent off to collections. ECOA and balance is showing what we were talking about earlier. It's more of an internal account, internal code that is used by the bureaus. So the ECOA, the VI, and the IS, you don't actually need to worry about whenever you look at this. The SRC, though, is the source. So it's showing that TUC is TransUnion, is the bureau that reported this information. But what's really important about this that I want to talk about for a minute is that we're getting into public records, and public records are going to be changing here pretty soon. Tax liens, civil judgments, bankruptcies, these all fall under this category. And as of July 1st of next year, 2017, the 3 bureaus are going to be working with the National Consumer Assistance Plan, which is to protect consumers, another step forward, protecting data and minimizing inaccuracies and minimizing victims of identity theft. And so what's worth noting on this is information that will no longer be available in the future. Most eviction cases are not going to be reported by Experian in this section, or by TransUnion or by Equifax. Criminal activity is never going to be reflected as a public record within the section of the report. However, a lot of people do rely on public records for eviction information. It does show whenever there's a monetary judgment, which happens quite frequently. And I've talked to many people who look at this section of the credit report for that type of information. The new criteria for this plan, the NCAP, NCAP is what they're calling it, is that it's going to set higher standards for protecting information. The minimum is required of consumer identifying information, which includes the name, the address, social security number if it is available, and or date of birth. And the minimum frequency being at least every 90 days, that a courthouse needs to be visited to obtain newly filed and updated public records for information to display. The biggest effect from these changes is that it's anticipated with the removal of civil judgment public record data that information relating to evictions is not going to be showing up anymore. They estimate that about 96% of that information that gets reported can't be validated the way that they need to change the ruling. And so because of that, they're just going to remove it completely. Eviction information is still available through third party. That would be the report that I referenced earlier. That is still fine, but the 3 credit bureaus don't want to be responsible for reporting that as a public record anymore. The other one is we're going to be anticipating as much as a 50% decrease in the available tax lien data that's going to be removed because of this change. These changes are likely going to have some form of maybe a moderate impact on consumer credit scores. However, something just to keep an eye on because FICO hasn't yet released their initial analysis. So the specifics of that impact are still a little bit unclear. What we're looking at currently on the public records, though, is similar but a little bit different format to what we saw with the evictions. So it's still going to show when the action was filed, who the plaintiff was, any activity that might be reported. It's going to show the court, and then the docket in this U.S. bankrupt, and then any assets or liabilities that are included in it. Every report is going to include the score and the risk model. In this case, we're looking at the FICO score. So it's the classic FICO 4 is the model that's being used for tenant reports. The TransUnion score in this case is showing 596 out of the 850 max. And then it's going to list different reasons that this score was affected. So in this case, there's been serious delinquency and/or public records or collections that were filed, the length of time since derogatory public record or collection, the number of accounts that have delinquency, the time since delinquency is too recent or unknown. All these are factors that have lowered the score to where it's at right now. Any prior inquiries is who else has looked at this person's report. Anytime that there's been a creditor, what type of inquiry was it? Were they applying for a loan of some kind? Or were they applying for multiple other apartments recently? Have they been jumping around in the last year and looked at many apartments that seem to keep getting denied? What the date was? ECOA is just referring to the same thing as the source. The TransUnion is who reported this information. The source information is just going to show how to get in touch with who reported these information, the different accounts, everything that was contained here. So if you had any questions, or if the applicant more so had questions, they know who to get in touch with. If they need to get in touch with the Bureau about a report, then all of that information is included. And that's the conclusion. That's gone through a full credit report. So I would like to open it up for questions right now. I'm going to open the chat window, and then let me take care of unmuting. Where is it? There we go. Okay, Andrew, I just took care of unmuting. I've got it unmuted if you want somebody to verbally ask, or chat window that way.
What's happened there? Hello? Hello?
Evergreen Realty, which is one of the biggest ones at 10,000.
Brian?
Yes.
I'm going to mute a couple of these for a minute.
Okay.
And I'll unmute Mark in just a second. We had a question from Dan.
Hello, my question is, if I understood you correctly, that all records drop off after 7 years max, except for sexual offenders?
Not just sexual offenders. It really depends on the severity. How long ago they were released, and what the crime was. For most crimes, 7 years is the rule from when they were convicted of it. But if there's obviously going to be something major, something that would show up elsewhere, manslaughter charges or violent sex offenses, those will still retain.
Thank you.
Okay, like that armed robbery and that second-degree murder, would those stay on?
Second-degree murder should. That's a pretty severe crime. Robbery is a 7-year rule.
Okay. Mark, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good, Andrew.
Okay. If you need any, just send me a message here.
They go over the changes
We've got a David B. He's got a question for you.
Hey, to the credit reports.
Oh, that NCAP, the NCAP in
Yeah.
July 1st of 2017. One of the things was about a 50% decrease in tax lien data, but you also mentioned some other substantial changes.
Yes, the biggest one is going to be on civil judgment. So,
On civil judgments?
right. So because the information that they're looking for is that, here's really the big thing to take away. There's two requirements that are being put on data that the credit bureaus are going to be adhering to. The first one is that the minimum required of consumer identifying information has to include name, address, social security number, and/or date of birth. Because of that, how I mentioned that some courts are limiting date of birth, and almost no court, I don't know if any of them are still using social security number. And because of that lack of information, providing accurate civil judgment information from the credit bureau's perspective is very limited. And because they estimate that 90%, 96% of those records are not going to meet that minimum criteria, they're just going to eliminate it from the credit reports altogether.
Okay. I have a quick question. When you look at the FICO score at 596, we had in the past, one of the things Mark Gillette brought up was, let's say you own properties all over the city, and you have maybe an A-class property and a B and a C and a D. Mark posed this question of, can you use different criteria? And we spoke with Don Grove about that, and he said yes, but you would have to substantiate why you're doing that, and you'd have to be consistent. Do you have any users of CIC information that we could have a cheat sheet and see what other people are doing? Is that like FICO scores? Or what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so you are correct that different properties can use different rental criteria, especially when you get into companies that may manage properties across multiple states or have 30,000 plus units. Having one rental criteria for everything is not a reasonable way to do things. So totally fine to be able to vary the rental policy based on property. Substantiating why, or being very clear in your rental policy is needed though. So for example, here we're looking at, the credit score as being 596. That could be a factor in the rental policy if you are very tight on the minimum credit score that will be accepted. But you should be looking at what type of property you have, what type of area you're in, the rental costs possibly around you could have an impact. So all of that is a factor. However, even bigger is that if you have two properties that are directly next door to each other with very comparable units, but very differing rental policies, that might get you in a bit of trouble as to explaining why. If they're in totally different areas of a city, much more reasonable. But being consistent with them is even more important. So if you have a clearly defined rental policy for one property, so long as you adhere to that with every applicant, when I went into eviction and criminal history above, if you're going to use that information, it has to be done on every applicant no matter what for a property. If you have two separate properties in different areas, you can run it on one property and not the other one, but you can't choose which applicants get what information done on them. All applicants need to be viewed exactly the same way based on the same type of report to create a fair and objective reason for the decision you come to. As far as clients we work with, I don't have anything that I would be able to provide as an example. And a big reason that we don't get too heavily involved with that is we provide information and we are happy to talk about any report and explain what information means. However, we don't get involved with the decision-making process. So we don't give the recommendation or examples of specific policies, what you should be doing. We give advice on how you might be able to go about it or what things people commonly do, but nothing written out that you would be able to just grab and use. Hopefully, there was a few parts to that question. Hopefully, did I cover everything? Is there anything that I missed on that?
On that same line of thinking, I have a question about, you have a built-in capability of a landlord or a property manager putting a filter so that kind of gives them a standard. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and thank you for bringing that up. So what we call it's a decision model. We refer to it as the cross score with CIC. And what we do is we sit down with you. We do have a comprehensive list of questions based on various factors of the report, based on evictions, based on criminal, based on all areas of credit, the score, rental history, verifications. So all of the information that can be in this report, we can have your rental policy essentially developed to run through this filter and provide you very quick and easy on the first page whether or not this person should be accepted or denied based on your criteria that we've already plugged in. It also has the option to come back with a response of conditional if they meet some requirements but not others. And so when that happens, we do list the reasons. Same thing with when they're denied. We list what reasons they were denied for. And we can choose what the severity is. So they might meet all of your criteria. However, they come through with having a violent sex offense as well. And you have a family property, that's an absolute dismissal right away. And so that alone would be denial. If it's conditional, that they don't have any credit or eviction history and their credit is just a little bit lower than you might be looking for, you might want to go back and take a look at it. And then we also have an option where you can run multiple applicants. So obviously this is going to be difficult if you have two different applicants that are looking to be roommates. One passes, one doesn't. So you're able to select multiple reports and have them combined using the same criteria to see whether or not husband and wife or roommate, all of their reports combined would meet your decision and would meet your rental policy. So a lot of companies that use that, it comes in extremely handy as a protective measure. When you have multiple properties, you have a lot of leasing agents, property managers, and they vary in different areas, and it reduces a lot of liability off of their shoulders, especially when you have newer people or people who are less experienced in the industry and aren't as used to objectively looking at the report. When they've got somebody sitting in front of them who looks like a great applicant, they want to move in right away, the cross score removes the decision from them. They look at a report, it tells them that person is denied, and that's the decision that they have to go with, or else they have to seek a higher level person within the organization who can review and change that decision for them. But it removes a lot of those liabilities that you get from every person's own perception on who they like and dislike with renting.
Copy of that decision model questionnaire.
I'm sorry? You're a little bit.
Could we get a copy of that decision model questionnaire?
That I need to double check. That generally goes through our compliance department who sit down with each customer. Let me verify with them whether or not I can release that document, or if they prefer to have it more on a case by case, they can meet with somebody and show them. And if so, I'm happy to send it over to you, and you can send it to anybody that requests it.
Just a question.
I'm sorry, Andrew, I can barely hear you.
Well, I may have this in the wrong place then. But not everything's perfect in life, I guess.
Okay, I can hear you a little bit better now.
little bit better? Let me try it one more time. Better?
Now I can hear you perfect.
Okay. That gain knob is important.
FICO score
Minimum FICO score.
and any upcoming changes in the FICO score.
Oh, there are some. Well, that's one of the things that Vantage model. Pat, why don't you state your question again? There's the minimum FICO score. There's minimum FICO score is like 350, isn't it?
300 to 850 is the scale.
300 to 850, and we got a lot of people that don't have a FICO score. So that's one of those conditional things that I think probably a lot of people in the room here have had that happen. Is that how many of you get people that don't have a score at all? A lot of people. Yeah, all kinds of people don't have a score. So then you have to have a little different decision model.
Right, and so there's a couple of things that we have for that because it is common. Anybody who has a very thin credit file or may not have lived in this country a very long time, may not have as much credit. Mm-hmm. So FICO relies on the information in the credit report to provide a score, and when there's just not enough information, it's not going to lower the score, it just refuses to give it all together. So the two ways that we kind of are working against that is the decision model that I just mentioned, which isn't going to give you a scale, it's not going to tell you a number, it's just going to give you an answer, and it's much more about your entire rental policy. Most likely without a credit score, if the file is that thin, you're going to get a conditional response, and so it will ask you to do a little bit more research because it's not sure whether or not you should accept this person. The alternative also is that we started working the last couple of years with the Vantage score that you mentioned a minute ago. And what the Vantage score is, they're currently on the 3.0 model. FICO is an algorithm, a credit score that was created by the Fair Isaac company and is still run by them. Vantage score is a competing score that was created by the three top credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. And they estimate that it's able to score approximately 30 million more consumers than FICO is able to, because it relies upon a greater source of information. So the information it draws from, if they have a thin credit file, it can still provide a score. Not 100%, but significantly more often than FICO would be able to in those situations. And the score was created on the same model as FICO, where it shows from 300 to 850, higher being the better score.
Okay, well, you know what? This has been very informative. We're going to have time for one more question, and Char Fritzel gets it. Yep. Come over here then.
Okay, this is a testimonial more than a question. I've been using CIC for the last 4 or 5 years, and I couldn't be happier with it, and I would recommend it to everybody in this room because it's gotten me out of running into a lot of problems.
Oh, fantastic. I am happy to hear that, and I would love if you're able to email that over to me, actually. We've been collecting feedback and testimonials for a while now, and I'd love to have that available for use in any of our marketing collateral. And I appreciate that that you enjoy our service. We really try to provide a great product and something that really helps the industry.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you so much, Ryan Green. Let's give him a round of applause.
All right. Happy to participate, Andrew. I hope everybody enjoyed this. And Andrew has it and can send out my information. If anybody has additional questions afterwards, I'm happy to correspond and happy to help out.
Excellent. Well, I've made them suffer through a little bit of pain here today, in auditory pain. We don't know what it is. It's on our end with these tinny speakers I have. We're looking for donations. Anybody have a spare set of Bose speakers? Okay. Hey, thank you so much. You have a great day.
You too, Andrew. Take care, everybody.
Go ahead and stop the recording, or maybe I'll stop it.
Nope.
I think